Okay, I just clicked.
Yep, we're good.
Okay.
She's a whiz.
And we're good. We're recording. Good. Your go.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Town Board work session for Tuesday, November 24th, 2020. The first item that we have on our work session agenda this evening is a special guest who's with us. Derek Anderson, who is the Executive Director of Northern Westchester Hospital, is with us this evening to provide us an update on Northern Westchester Hospital's COVID-19 related statistics, their recovery efforts, then their preparations for the possible resurgence, as well as the successful opening of their Cath Lab. So Derek, thank you so much for agreeing to be with us and welcome to Newcastle.
Great, thank you so much, Supervisor Poole, and to the town board. It's great to be with you all tonight. If I may, I'm going to share a couple of very brief slides just to make some of this a little bit visual. So very quickly, as it relates to COVID, as you can see from this graph, for many months, the hospital was operating in the 0 to 3 COVID positive patients admitted to the hospital. This does not account for patients coming into the emergency department who don't require admission to the hospital. That's a whole nother host of individuals. These are just admitted hospitalized patients. For the past, so we were hovering at that 0 to 3 for probably close to 4 or 5 months. In the last couple of weeks, as you've read, you've seen in the news, and certainly Mount Kisco and some of our surrounding communities have become yellow zones. We've started to see that number rise. And as of this morning, we have 18 COVID positive patients in the hospital. Just to put that into perspective, at the peak of COVID in the spring, we had close to 100 in the hospital. So still very far from where we were in the spring, but still cause for alarm. As you can see, just since really the 15th of the month in the last 10 days, we've more than doubled. We're hoping that number somewhat flattens. We're kind of anxious to see what happens after the holidays. We would encourage everybody, please practice good social distancing and to avoid those more severe types of cases. But you can see that's where we are as of this morning. And it's pretty similar. It ebbs and flows. As of 10 minutes ago, it was about 17. So as patients are discharged, they do well and go home. Now, I will say what's markedly different than in the spring is fewer of these patients are being admitted to the ICU. There are a lot of advancements in therapies, remdesivir, which is now actively used here at Northern Westchester Hospital. We're in 3 other clinical trials, as well as early interventions that you may have read about, like high flow oxygen, proning of patients. A lot of those things really are making a good, strong difference when it comes to advancing and an individual's illness progressing to needing ICU. Of the 17, this morning, there are only 2 in the ICU. And knock on wood, many mornings we come in, there's no one in the ICU. So just everything from a mortality rate, a severity rate, because of some of the advances that we've learned in the last 10 months. Remember, in the spring, it was all very new to us. So we weren't quite sure what we were dealing with. We now understand it much more. There's been a lot of studies published. So that's really the good news, despite the curve going up. I will share across the region as Northwell Health. Some of you know Northern Westchester Hospital is a part of the 23-member Northwell Health. And in all of our facilities, as of this morning, we had about 455 patients. At the peak of COVID, within our hospitals, we had close to 3,500 COVID positive patients at one time. And Northwell Health, as a total entity, we have treated successfully over 100,000 COVID patients, by far the largest provider of any healthcare provider in the United States. So as you can imagine, the depth of clinical expertise and the depth of resources we plug into Northwell every day. And we have colleagues and good friends across the system that we collaborate on. So that's kind of how we're looking across the system. On the testing front, some of you may have heard or felt a change in testing. Some of our local providers, as far as primary care providers, are having a tough time getting supplies and testing capability. In response to that, we have continued to ramp up our testing capability. And currently at the Center for Healthy Living, this is our center right next door, adjacent to Whole Foods down at Chappaqua Crossing. Effectively, 7 days a week, anyone can walk in. You need a prescription, but anybody can get tested for COVID. The reason for the prescription is your primary care provider or a physician needs to ultimately advise you on, once you get the results, what do I do? How do I treat it? And so having that physician giving you that order, not only is it a legal requirement for a COVID test, but it also protects you as you progress with communication with a primary care provider. So as long as they have a prescription, they're welcome to walk into the center, and it's effectively 7 days a week. We are doing a fair amount of testing through the center at the front as well as the back for patients coming in for surgery at the hospital. We keep those two populations separate, as in those who we know are just needing a test for a safe surgery. We do those through the back, different process, different staff. And then in the front is more those who may suspect or are looking for, so they may or may not be COVID positive, and we kind of treat that population differently. So a lot of testing being done. There's probably close to anywhere between 130 and 160 individuals every day come into the center and are tested for COVID. Normally, the turnaround time on that test is between, it's somewhere between 24 and 72 hours. A lot of them come back relatively quick. We have pretty high capacity testing at Northwell. It's mostly just travel time, but it could, depending on how the timing works out, it could end up being a day or two, and the demand. But in general, it's offering more and more testing to the community, especially during the holidays. As you can imagine, we're just seeing a lot of people coming in, college kids coming back, parents, families wanting to get their family tested. We welcome all of that. Just know, as you kind of see on some news reports across the country, there might just be a little bit of a wait. And for the most part, we're finding patients are okay for that wait as long as they can get a test and it's safe.
Do you speak for a minute on the rapid antigen test versus the PCR test and the context for choosing one or the other?
Yeah, sure. So just know that I'm speaking from a non-clinician standpoint. I am not a physician, but there are a lot of rapid tests out there. Believe it or not, there's probably close to 40 different COVID tests on the market right now. Some of them, you hear the term rapid. Some of them are saliva tests. Some of them are the nasal swab, just like the typical PCR test. Any of the rapid tests, there's a very wide variety of reliability for those tests. In general, because it's a rapid nature, it's not done on a more sensitive machine that typically takes longer, which is why it's rapid versus not. The rapid tests are just generally less reliable. So you could have we see a lot of false negatives or a lot of false positives, depending on the test. In general, if you have little concern that you have COVID and you just would maybe safe mind, at least for that snapshot, because remember, a test is only giving you a snapshot in time, the rapid could suffice. But if there is a concern or you've been exposed, we do recommend getting a much more reliable test, which is that diagnostic PCR test, which is done by the nasal swab.
Does the Center for Healthy Living offer both varieties of tests?
No, the only test we offer is the nasal swab. Across all of our Northwell entities, we're pretty firm about wanting to make sure that the test is 99% reliable, which is the statistic. And so we do not offer the rapid test. Let me just clarify that. There are some patients who come into the hospital that we have. It's a very expensive. It's limited by the government at the federal level. We do receive, we call them rapids. It's for patients, laboring mothers coming in to deliver, or very urgent surgeries that we need an answer within an hour before they go in for surgery. In those cases, we call that a rapid, but it is done on some pretty sophisticated machinery that gives you the same level of reliability.
That's awesome context. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. So I know we're up against time. So just very quickly, beyond COVID, and I'm happy to answer any questions in a few minutes about COVID or any topic. What's very exciting for this community as a whole is in September, we officially opened a Cath Lab. A Cath Lab is a center, and I'll show you just this picture where, and we have 2 physical rooms that look just like this. This is advanced cardiac care effectively in our backyard. So any type of heart attack, advanced heart illness in any fashion, here at Northern Westchester Hospital, we now offer full cardiac capability 24/7. So, and just in the last 3 months, we've had almost 400 patients from our catchment area that have now undergone a procedure in one of our 2 labs, which speaks to how much this was needed in our community. And remember, when it comes to heart care, it's like the brain that you think about with a stroke. Time is muscle. So the longer that your heart is away from potentially a procedure like a cath procedure that would remove the clot or insert a stent that would then restore blood flow, the longer you get away from that cath lab, even if it's 20, 30 minutes, increases your risk of long-term heart damage. So we've had dozens of stories of individuals who right here in Chappaqua, Mount Kisco, kind of our immediate 10-town area that have come in that within minutes are in the cath lab and have 0 damage and 0 long-term effects to their heart because of this. So this is very exciting for us and for the community. Already we've seen it just be an incredible success. What's most important for us on this, most important, is the quality is phenomenal. So of the 400 patients, the rates of everything from survival to effectiveness to quality, all of the quality outcomes rival any of our large academic centers within the region. So, and we have, let me go back 1 slide. We have world-class physicians, Dr. Reimers to the left of the screen, who is the director of the Cath Lab, Dr. Singh, who's the head of cardiology for Lenox Hill Hospital in Manhattan, one of the first heart hospitals within New York City several decades ago. And Dr. Singh brings an incredible prowess. He's here every Friday. Dr. Renee, who's the associate director in the middle with Caremount, and Dr. Rashid and Dr. Bassman. All of these individuals are incredibly well-trained, incredible pedigrees. And so you're getting world-class physicians and care close to home, which is most important. Lastly, I just want to touch really quickly, there's a lot of developments going on at the hospital despite COVID, and that includes the Ashikari Institute, which is an incredibly high-quality surgeon group in this area in Westchester. They are officially starting with a hospital on January 4th. Dr. David Gordon is joining us next week as our chairman of neurosurgery. He joins us from NYU Langone and is going to help us kind of build on the excellence around neurosurgery. He's advanced cranial brain tumor-based surgeon. So a lot of this is happening in your sophisticated backyard here in Mount Kisco at Northern Westchester Hospital. Dr. Buckholz with orthopedics, and then we have Dr. Cotillo and Dr. Marks with oncology and surgery. So a lot of good things happening on this front. I'm just going to end with a message that we've continued to try to get out there. And if you can help us, please carry this message. Even as the COVID numbers are rising, everything is being done to keep what we call COVID contained, which is to say that our COVID patients are tucked away. The hospital, Northern Westchester Hospital, is entirely private rooms. We installed, as a learning from the spring, advanced air filtration, effectively making it a negative pressure room in almost all of our COVID rooms within the hospital. So effectively all of our private rooms matched with that advanced air circulation keeps patients tucked away, isolated from other patients. All of our surgery is done in a separate building. So that's in the ambulatory surgery building. It's the north part of the campus. And those patients we keep very separated and on different floors. So please know that there's a lot of protocols that we're following, including testing of patients in advance. Believe it or not, there are patients who have no symptoms who test positive for COVID. We delay the surgery until they're COVID negative. And that's really for their safety as a patient, but also for the staff safety to reduce risk and exposure. If you've come into the hospital, there's all sorts of measures that we've put into place around automatic temperature screening as you walk in the front door. That's incredibly accurate. Checklists of questions. Our waiting rooms are very socially distanced. Our visiting hours still are restricted to 3:30 to 6:30 p.m. We're continuing to evaluate that. We used to be 11 to 7, but we recently narrowed that to reduce fewer individuals coming into the building as the numbers are slowly increasing. And then there's a lot of other things that are more exciting for us, less exciting for you, but please know that we're doing everything possible to keep our patients safe, our staff safe, and with the field hospital, lastly, which is a 40-bedded field hospital, it is fully ready to go. I hope we don't have to use it. And then I'm going to end with one last kind of bright spot, which is starting right after Thanksgiving, we are offering the monoclonal antibody therapy. You may have read about this. This is the Eli Lilly therapy. It is an infusion. It's an hour infusion of antibodies for patients that are COVID positive. They have to be a certain number of days out from symptoms beginning. They have to fit a certain age range, and they can't have an oxygen level below a certain level. If the patient fits all of those criteria, and believe it, there are a lot of patients that fit in that criteria, it is highly effective at reducing or even entirely preventing that patient from needing a hospital. So it's really a great breakthrough. We're excited. We are the location for Westchester County. It is going to be in the field hospital. We're designating 8 beds. As soon as it's live, we'll make sure that Supervisor Poole will make sure you and our President's Council of the hospital have full access to the phone number. And then it goes through a triage with a physician, assuring that they fit the criteria, and then they're handed off to a clinical individual who schedules them at one of our centers. So really, we're excited to be able to offer that to our community to prevent even that further escalation of COVID. So with that, I hope I didn't overwhelm you with information, but it's all good stuff. We're ready to embrace hopefully what will not come, but please know we're here for you. We're ready for you, and that we're doing everything possible. And to date, I'm knocking on wood, we have 0 patient-to-patient exposure at Northern Westchester Hospital. So we're being very strict, borderline OCD about your safety, which I think all of us would expect should we have a loved one that has to be admitted to the hospital.
Can I thank you? That's incredible. Thank you for your presentation, and thanks for coming by to give us this briefing. I wanted to follow up with you about the field hospital, which I, in my sort of layman's terms, just refer to as the tent. I think there's a lot of people in the community who feel anxious about the tent. So they see it there and it makes them worry that we're, about to see a resurgence, or that the hospital is, nearing capacity. I know you told us we have 18 there today. And yesterday I heard from the county executive that we have 168 hospitalizations for COVID countywide. And I think he said 3,100 beds. So I was just wondering if you could say a little bit about the kind of calculus that you guys do with regard to keeping that tent up this year.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for us, if I'm being honest, it creates a little bit of anxiety for us as well. But what it does do is it makes us feel prepared you've seen reports in different parts of the country and even in New York, where ERs are overrun, patients are back to back on stretchers in hallways. That is not the level of care that we expect for our patients in our community. So because of that, we made the decision to keep the tent up. And we've gone through, believe me, every iteration of wanting to take it down, but knowing that if something were to creep up and we need those beds, it's not that easy to flip the switch, nor to plan for it. So in the middle, so let's plan and hope to not have to use it. And then frankly, it also allowed us for a situation like the monoclonal antibody therapy. If we didn't have that tent, and a lot of hospitals are in this situation, where do you bring COVID positive patients for a 2-hour procedure? You can't do that. So that's where the tent is already starting to maybe become an advantage for us as a community. But our capacity at Northern Westchester Hospital is completely under control. It would have to be pretty dire, and we've learned a lot since the spring. We could easily go well beyond the 100 that we saw in the spring. And to be honest, the tent is a part of that planning. Having an experience in the tent, we have, and we like to call it a field hospital, maybe just makes us feel better. It sounds like a more sophisticated term, but it is a tent. But you may have noticed we piped in oxygen. It's on our emergency backup. In fact, all the bays are completely private. There's actual built walls with curtains, so you have privacy. It is, in all sense of the term, there to avoid this overcrowding situation that you see many hospitals in the country right now. So it does cost money. It is an investment. It might cause us all a little bit of anxiety, but it's all in the spirit of planning. And we want to have a bed available if a patient needs it.
That's great. Thank you. Just knowing that is a level of confidence, I feel like, for those of us who felt anxious. Derek, I don't believe we have the county executive with us just yet. Do you mind if we take a couple of questions?
Oh, no, please. I would welcome it.
That'd be great. So if anybody out there has a question, feel free to raise your digital hand. And then Pam, can we just, actually,
the county executive
as I said that, the county executive is the one who raised his hand.
Excellent. Well, it was great to be with you. Ivy, you know how to get a hold of me. You have all my contact info. So if something comes up, I'm here to serve this community. So please, if there's a concern, a question, I'm here to answer and be available.
Derek, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And, I've said to many people this year that, you're new in your role and your leadership at Northern Westchester Hospital, and in particular, the way that you've informed and sort of brought together the neighboring communities around Northern Westchester Hospital has been really admirable. And so I want to thank you again for your service and your assistance in this really difficult year.
Thank you. We have a great community. All right. Thank you. Have a great night.
Thanks so much.
So the next special guest, we're full of special guests this evening. The next special guest we have this evening at tonight's work session is our County Executive, George Latimer, who was generous enough to offer to stop by our work session this week to give us an update on the COVID-19 numbers throughout Westchester County. George?
Thank you very much, Ivy. Appreciate it. I'll try to be brief since I was a relatively unscheduled stop on your behalf. I just had my executive team in the other room. We were on an hour-long call with your neighbors in Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow, going over the protocol of what we're trying to do to be helpful to them in terms of this yellow zone designation. So I'll try to summarize in general. As you track, the Newcastle results on a regular basis, we have gotten access to additional information that we have not had for most of the time of this pandemic. And as I mentioned on a call that I think Ivy was listening to on Monday, we're going to try to figure out how to get you more statistical data on your community and every community for that matter going forward. It may take us until the middle of next week to get it the way we wanted to, But it's important now because we are seeing a rise in COVID across the board. Just to give you a quick thumbnail sketch, working off of numbers that came up today. As of today, we have 4,936 active cases of COVID countywide. An active case is somebody who's been tested within the last week, 2 weeks, determined to be positive and has not yet gone through the 2-week incubation period to know whether or not they have a full-blown case of COVID or not. That number of 4,936 on Tuesday, a week ago, was 3,749. So that's an increase over that period of time of 1,200 cases in a week. 2 weeks ago, the number was 2,374. And if you go back 3 weeks ago, which was election day, hardly something way out of our mindset, the number of active cases was 1,610 countywide. Today, we're at 4,936. That's a tripling of active cases in the 3 weeks since election day. And so whatever you're seeing in your numbers, you're seeing it everywhere in the county, going up pretty quickly. In general, the areas that are worst hit are those that have a more urbanized core. Certainly the big cities and the villages with dense population. It does track poverty. The less wealthy the community is, the more likely you have more spread. People live in closer quarters. There's larger families in smaller areas, very difficult to isolate. We have in some communities people for whom English is not their primary language. So our public communications effort has to be in the language and from the cultural platform that best reaches them. We have trouble doing that effectively all across the board. And some communities are spiking higher than others. There are 6 zones that have been established around the county by the governor. These are decisions made in Albany by the governor and the people around him. Nearby to you is Ossining and Tarrytown, Sleepy Hollow, up the line in Peekskill, down in Portchester, and then in sections of Yonkers and New Rochelle, basically tracking zip codes. They've crafted these zones. 5 of the 6 are yellow zones, which is the initial stage of concern. One of them, Portchester, is orange, which is the intermediate zone. And in this color-coded world, red is the most severe zone. And in each of these different zones, different things happen. In the precautionary zone, businesses stay open. By the time you get to red, businesses close down except for the most essential businesses. The school district in the yellow zone has to test over a certain period of time, 20% of their students and their staff. It closes down in the orange and the red zone. There's a capacity number for houses of worship that starts out at 50% of capacity, and it goes down to functionally shutting houses of worship in the red zone. So obviously the governor's doing this based on numbers and statistics, but he's tasking us. And who's us? The county, the town, the villages, the cities, the school districts, in trying to figure out how to administer these things. So whether it's, your school district or your town government or the other governments around, our attitude is we are in this together. We will try to find ways to satisfy what the mandates are from Albany and try to keep everybody out of any of these zones, or if they're in the zone, to get them out of the zone. Right now, the numbers, while they're rising everywhere in Chappaqua and Millwood, are not yet at a crisis point where we expect a zone to happen. But we don't know. It's really a function of what's happening out there in the community. And of course, as we go into Thanksgiving period of time, we know it's a family holiday. It's a secular holiday. Many folks will gather. We hope people will use common sense. You face the issue of how heavily do you enforce certain things, and certainly enforcing masks in a public domain, keeping restaurants closed after 10. Those are more enforceable than enforcing what happens in someone's private property. And of course, once you have a beautiful home, some spacious land around it, we really don't know what's going on in that house that's, an acre plus in size and distance from the street. So to some extent, we've taken the attitude that neither the town nor the county can fully enforce these dictates. They represent common sense dictates, advisories, but the act of enforcing them is just going to be too difficult for us to be able to do it. So we hope that we'll have, some rationality on all of this. What I will tell you is that we are trying, as we did during the heart of the pandemic in the spring, to be able to provide to some degree the PPE that you may need and to channel it through the local government, through town hall, on the presumption that you know best how to disseminate it. I assume you're in touch with the Chappaqua Millwood Chamber of Commerce. You're in touch with the institutions in your community that would serve people the most and would need it the most. And if we can get you quantities of it, you'll figure out how to disseminate it. either by people coming to pick it up or you proactively giving them out. Once we cross into the zones, the yellow, red, orange zone, then we take a much more proactive approach of trying to figure out how do we get it into targeted communities by demographics, by need, by poverty, and so forth. And it also leads us to the testing component. Now, it's a very difficult process. I've been through 2 scares myself, and I've been tested twice with the swab test. Not awful, but I don't particularly care to have another one if I can avoid it. The bottom line, though, is that when you listen to the public health protocol, it's you can't take the test right away. If you think you've been exposed, you got to wait a few days, and you have to be isolated while you're waiting. Then after you get the test, if it's negative, then you still have to precautionarily quarantine. And then if you're positive, you have to isolate 14 days and so forth. Many people, knowing that they would have to be out of their business life or their work life, are just not going to do that. And I can work remotely, but if my mom and dad were alive, they were blue collar workers. There's no remote working when my mom went to a factory to work a factory line, or when my dad was a maintenance man at a beach and tennis club. So there are people out there in the community that will work until they get sick. And in that process, will spread the disease, even as we try to communicate the public health protocols that we're hearing from the CDC all the way on down. So every community is different. Every community's got different demographics, different challenges. And obviously the thing that you can do as the leaders of your community, you're doing it already, is thinking ahead. What will we do if this? What will we do if that? And then, using your supervisor as a point of contact, indicate to us, George, if this happens and we have to go to this, situation, here's what we think we need from you to be helpful to us. Here's how we would handle the additional testing we need. Here's where we would stage it at. And you're in the position of being able to plan those things out now, because you aren't in the zone and you aren't quite yet close enough to the zone. And it is possible, if things go southbound here after the Thanksgiving holiday, the governor might, and he has the right, to do this, he might reserve the right to shut things down unilaterally. And he could certainly shut down industries like bars, health clubs, beauty salons, nail salons, tattoo parlors. I'm overdue for a haircut. I'm going to get my haircut after work tomorrow, just in case he shuts it down for a couple of months, because I can't afford to have, this type of situation. And, he may do that. And I think we have to be prepared for that if that's the outcome. The county has provided a certain amount of money available to help small businesses. You're well aware of the Business First program. Some of your businesses in the community have benefited from it. We had a first round of funding that benefited about 250, 300 different businesses. We intend a second round of funding in the month of December. I don't know how much money we'll be able to allocate. We're using COVID CARES Act money to do this, so that those businesses that can be helped structurally, this is where, the business needs to fix the HVAC in order to accommodate indoor ventilation for a small retail establishment, where there was outdoor dining, to get heaters for outdoor plexiglass barriers, and they need the money to do this, and they don't have the revenue coming in. And so we've tried to step forward with some modest grants, $40,000 grants. We've had them at smaller increments. We also made some IDA money available. So we're trying to help along those lines. Even in communities like Chappaqua and Millwood, the community that I live in Rye, there's still food insecurity for certain numbers of people. We're working through Feeding Westchester and through the local food pantries. And we know there's some, in the vicinity. And sometimes for folks, it's a little embarrassing, but we don't want them to be embarrassed. But we are trying to put more money behind making food available. So if somebody loses their job, and if they don't have the ability to put food on the table, that they can get some basic subsistence, and the county will help to some degree in this. We really need the state and the federal government to do some of these things. And of course, the state has tried. They have a big financial situation. We really need the federal government to get in the game. We think that's coming now at long last, and we hope that will be helpful to us. But that's something to look ahead to if there is a more full shutdown in all of these things as we try to work through them. And of course, the economic impacts to all of us are there. The more you rely on sales tax and income tax, which are variable revenue streams, they depend on the strength of the economy as to how much you raise, as opposed to property taxes. The town relies more on property taxes than other revenue sources. The county relies slightly more on sales tax, but we still have a property tax revenue base. The state relies on income tax and state taxes, so their revenue stream is much more impacted by this. That has a lot to do with the kind of things we face. I presume you, like us, are on a calendar year fiscal year. I don't know where you are on your budget process. We have our Board of Legislators reviewing the situation. We've been able to construct a budget which actually will cut the county property tax levy again this year, as we did last year. Now, because of equalization, you never know what the impact is going to be. But for Newcastle residents last year, meaning 2020 compared to 2019, you had a 3% cut in your county taxes based on the $1 million cut we made in levy. Not everybody had that. Some had a smaller cut, a couple had a larger cut. We don't know if the same will apply. We'd have to see equalization rates and assessment rolls, but we are striving for a county budget that will again cut $1 million in overall county property tax levy. So we're doing what we can do in our portion of the tax bill. We know that your portion of the tax bill and our portion of the tax bill together is about a third of what somebody pays in property taxes. 2/3 of it will go to the school district, but we're trying to be sensitive to the economic impact of this. All in all, we are like you. We're trying to figure our way through something for which there is no absolute roadmap. We are not geniuses. We don't act like we know everything, but we are trying to be as creative as we can with the resources we can. And the message that I delivered to you is the one I delivered when I was with you in person a while ago, which is we are partners in this. We are not one level of government, and we look with no concern to what happens in your level of government. A person who lives in Chappaqua, Millwood, also lives in the county of Westchester. They count on you for certain services. They count on us for other services. They are complementary. And so to the extent that you face concerns, reach out to us. We'll try to work with you and be helpful to the extent of our ability.
That's great. Thank you so much, George. And for everyone who's listening, I know we have a lot of participants with us. It's been a goal of the town also to do our best to hold the line on property taxes this year. So the efforts of the county, coupled with the efforts of the town to keep flat our tax levy in the general and highway funds means that, residents in our community are going to be well taken care of to the extent that we're able to do so. So we thank you for your partnership in doing that, because I know it's meant a lot to people in this community and every community in Westchester this year, the pinch that people have felt. So thank you for that.
I don't know if it's appropriate to take questions or you prefer to do it in another fashion. I can certainly take them now, or you can send me emails. We'll follow up separately, whatever is convenient to your schedule.
If you have a moment, George, and can take a couple of questions, I would love to be able to open it up to people. We do have quite a few people on the line tonight. So if anyone, I'll start with the town board. If anyone on the town board has any questions for the county executive, and then for those of you on the call, if you want to raise your digital hand, we can try to add you in as well.
And may I congratulate Dr. Morton for joining the town board after this most recent election. And Lori, good luck, and look forward to working with you along with the rest of the board.
Thanks so much, George.
I think I put him to sleep, Ivy. I'm sorry.
Anyone questions?
Not as fast as a New Yorker can talk, so.
I'll ask you a question. You mentioned the business first funding, and I probably should be aware of that, but was hearing it for the first time that there was going to be a second round of funding made available. Is that going to be a second application process, or are you?
We're going to work off those individuals who had filed with us before, and we could not reach them, in the priority list. There was a priority assessment made for each of the different applications. And as much as we had money, we went down the list, and then we stopped because we had no further funds. And we're looking to determine how much we can allocate now, and then we would continue down that list as far as we can go. Bridget Gibbons, who's our Director of Economic Development, is supervising the process, but we're using community capital to do the actual screening. We're not making the screening, the decisions about the screening of it. And I'm sure there are Chappaqua and Millwood groups in that list that did get funding, and I'm hopeful there'll be some in the next round of funding too. And then, of course, if the feds provide us next year with additional COVID Act care money, and we follow the regs. I mean, we do exactly what they let us do. If they let us do it, we do it. And in this particular case, if they allow us to allocate from a future revenue stream, then there'd be a third round of funding sometime next year if that comes to pass.
Great. Thank you. I also just wanted to acknowledge that we do have Dr. Christine Ackerman on the line too, who's the superintendent of the Chappaqua Central School District. And you mentioned earlier, George, the efforts that communities have made to ramp up their testing capabilities and capacity. And Dr. Ackerman and the Board of Education in their most recent meeting announced that they are moving forward with a testing plan that would potentially enable them to stay open if Newcastle were made a yellow zone, which we're all hopeful that will not happen, but I, commend them for the work that they've done to plan for that possibility.
We have, as in every Monday afternoon, as the supervisor knows, we have a municipal call with the local village, town, city reps, and then of course our county and state legislators participate in that call. Every Monday morning under the leadership of Joe Ricca, Dr. Joe Ricca, who's the superintendent of White Plains, we have a similar call with school superintendents. The county does not directly they serve as a report mechanism between the school districts and the state, but we've tried same thing, trying to be a partner, and Christine and others have been on it. They have given us insight, and we've tried to be helpful within our parameter. It's very difficult to run a town right now. It's very difficult to run a school district. There's just a way around it. And we're, as I said, and we're getting advisories from the state, interpreting them as we go along. Your attorney, our county attorney, and determining what does it mean, how do we implement this, and then we go to our professionals in each department of the school district, the county government, the town government. How would we actually do this? Do we have the manpower? Just to get through all these things. So,
Great.
In any event, I think I will self-control. I'll use my own invisible hook. And thank you for the opportunity to come visit. Hopefully, when the time is better, we'll come visit again. And I just do want to mention one more thing on an unrelated topic. Newcastle has a designated seat on the Airport Advisory Board. And my policy has been, since I took over, is not to appoint somebody that I think is right from each community, but rather to turn to the town board and the county legislator to make that assessment. You have currently Rob Fleischer in that seat, and I look forward to whatever discussion and advisory you have. It's my appointment, but it's really my appointment at the recommendation of the town board and the county legislators. So not that you needed one more thing on your list, but we want to make sure that whatever happens at the airport, your voice is being heard and represented at that table. So I just let you know that. And then I will say good night because I am literally zooming off to the New Rochelle School Board next. So.
Right. Thanks again, George. We appreciate you being with us.
Okay, take care, friends. Happy Thanksgiving.
So the next item that's coming up on our work session agenda is a discussion about the form-based code and the draft generic environmental impact statement. Before we do that, the town board has been on for about an hour and a half together, and I'm getting text messages that folks could use a brief 2-minute break. So we're going to put everybody on hold for about 2 minutes, and then we'll get started with that portion of the agenda. Thanks. Are we all back or no? I still see a couple names missing. There's Christina. We're on California time, I guess. 2 minutes turned into into 5. I'm from California, so I'm allowed to make that joke. Okay, I think we're ready to roll. Pam, are we still live and
Yep.
recording?
Never stop. You're all
Oh,
good.
excellent. Oh, good. All right, welcome back everyone for the continuation of the Town Board's work session of Tuesday, November 24th. The next item on our agenda for this evening is our Town Board discussion of the form-based code and the draft generic environmental impact statement. So tonight we are beginning our internal discussions, which are informed, of course, by the comments and the feedback that we've received through the public hearing process, which is still ongoing. The Town Board, we are committed to keeping an open mind. We are still listening to and accepting public comments. All of those that we will continue to receive through the public hearings and through the written comment process will be considered. This conversation this evening is not meant to imply that we are not continuing to listen and continuing to keep an open mind. That said, we did want to begin to have a dialogue about sort of our own opinions on the form-based code. So just before we launch in, I wanted to cover a few topics just at the top. So I will say Newcastle residents who live in the Chappaqua Central School District likely received an email from the Board of Education that stated that they were, quote, deeply concerned that the Newcastle Town Board's rezoning plan as it stands in its current form could negatively impact our school system. So I just wanted to provide some reassurance to the community that the form-based code is still a draft and the town is fully committed to taking the time to get it right. So rest assured that we have heard the input from the BOE as well as from the community, and we are very much taking it to heart. The current draft will change. It will change. And we look forward to working collaboratively with CCSD and the Board of Ed, as well as members of our community and all of the interested agencies that we've identified. All 5 members of the Newcastle Town Board, and I should just note that Jason Lichtenthal was unable to join us this evening, but all 5 members of the Newcastle Town Board have kids in the school district, and none of us would support a code that would adversely impact our children's education. We are listening and we are grateful for the feedback from the community that we continue to receive. Engagement from CCSD and from the Board of Ed makes this code and makes our entire community stronger. Earlier today, the Town Board sent a letter to the BOE, which said, in part, I'm quoting, we believe that the best way to demonstrate our shared desire to work together in the best interest of the community is by coming together in the spirit of partnership and collaboration at a public meeting. So to that end, the Town Board has invited the Board of Ed, CCSD administration, and their consultants to attend a joint work session with the Newcastle Town Board on Tuesday, January 12th at 7 p.m. The purpose of this work session would be to review and discuss the results of their consultants' analyses. And this meeting, like all Town Board work sessions, will be open to the public. The Town Board would then hold an additional public hearing after that joint meeting. We've tentatively penciled that in for January 19th, at which time the public would be able to provide comments based on the material that they've heard at the meeting on the 12th. So just note that in addition, the Town Board has already committed that we are going to be holding open our written public comment period on the DGEIS for at least 30 days after the close of the public hearing. So with all of that said, and as far as the structure for the conversation this evening, first I'm going to give each Town Board member an opportunity to sort of reflect broadly on the form-based code and the DGEIS, as well as the process to date. This is what Lisa or Jeremy might call an opening statement, and Lauren and I might just call an overview. We'll start with that. And then we'll kind of shift into a more detailed discussion of several topic areas related to the form-based code. So with all that said, let's start with kind of our high-level reflections, and I'll turn first to our Deputy Supervisor, Jeremy Saland.
Thank you very much, Ivy. I am very appreciative. I will also start when you say a high overview sort of from the beginning, and then we'll work ourselves forward. After the Newcastle comprehensive plan was adopted in 2017, around 2019, the town board kicked off this form-based code process. Initially, it's about 2 years old, give or take, and we initiated it with the Chappaqua Millwood Chamber of Commerce for that first event, if you will. And for roughly the next 2 years, this town board and the prior town board under then Supervisor Robert Greenstein, we had about or at least 10 meetings in these work group sessions, along with the planning board, individually as well, working with some members of the planning board and communicating with them and staff, in addition to these sit downs. There was an engagement where the maximum build out was demonstrated. I believe we had probably 2 sessions of that, or over the course of multiple days. There was at least one mailing, if not 2, referencing the zoning change. Dozens and dozens of mentions of the form-based code in our e-newsletter, on Facebook, on our website. And during these work sessions, members of the public, in fact, did come, and they had the opportunity to share and say things. Some, in fact, did. When it came up to the election, some candidates for local office came and had the opportunity to share, comment, and I believe they did. Interested agencies were notified formally as a matter of law, not to each event, but in terms of what we were doing. They had the opportunity to come and make a statement or get involved as they deemed appropriate. But no matter who showed up and no matter what was said or wasn't said, the important thing is we are here now. We can't change what happened already in the past. We are here, we are listening, we're open. We want to make this work. We need to make this work for the community. Some people have, I think, wrongly asserted, and you touched on this, Ivy, just a moment ago, that sort of we're turning a blind eye about the potential influx of students in our schools. And unequivocally, that's simply not true. And it's not fair and it's not reasoned. But before we even get into that, and as part of that as well, what I'd like to discuss is that number that we've all heard of 1,000 units coming to Newcastle, possibly, or the Hamlet, pardon me, if there is this enormous build out, which is roughly, in fact, I think 996 units. But that again assumes, and that's the big assumption, that we take no steps to change the form-based code in its current iteration. And I can assure you, no matter what ultimately does happen and where it does go, we will be changing that. We will be making modifications to it. And I would also add that that assumption that I hope people will put to the side assumes that, for example, we hit the maximum build out, which we haven't to date. It doesn't take into consideration, although it should, that there's already 300 plus units that we haven't built out to date that are part of that 1,000. It should take into consideration the fact that that would include 300 plus units, I think 334 units, if I'm not mistaken, only if we were to sell public land or a future town board, and ultimately there was no referendum to challenge that. All this being said, I want to state that without knowing at how much or how far we go, all of us are open to addressing, minimizing the scope of the form-based code from what you currently are seeing. And this was never intended to be the final draft. I have some statements or questions or comments I wanted to share. These aren't inclusive of everything, and they're no particular order, but questions that I'm concerned about that we have been brought up to us was, are 5-story buildings, are they too imposing? Should they be any 5-story buildings? Should that matter, is there a way that some or all 4-story buildings can become 3-story buildings? If there are 4-story buildings, where should they be? And is it possible, for example, to have them set back on the top to protect view sheds? What about the geographic scope of the form-based code? Without going into detail, we are concerned about the residents who have voiced their concerns at 149 King Street. We're not ignoring that by any stretch of the imagination. Should the form-based code go that far? Should it go to the post office? How far should it go up the hill on King Street? These are all very reasonable and important issues that we have to address. I think one of the bigger issues that I've heard that has resonated with all of us is that some residents have shared their concern over the limited role or involvement of the planning board. And while I believe that many misunderstand the role and the authority of the public has in these proceedings, should we consider mandating that any development of a certain size go before the planning board without committing to whether it's 10, 20, 30 units, but it should go back before the planning board to build in that protection? Or for that matter, should there be some sort of consultation that even if it's not mandatory in terms of what will happen, but there's a consultation with the planning board on all development so that residents can at least be heard and there could be some sort of process here. There's been conversations about traffic, what will happen with the traffic. And I think it's been pointed out by Sabrina that no matter what happens, we should expect traffic to change or get worse over time. So what adaptations should we start looking at now? Going out, exit and entrance to the back of the train station, the slip lane on 117 becoming a dedicated lane, and a four-way intersection with crosswalks and a light by the train station in Bell. Are these possibilities? No one's committing to them, but these are things that we need to examine and look at. One other thing before I continue and just wrap this up is there's been a lot of talk about what people's fair share is. And if there are too many apartments in the school district, that they won't be paying their fair share. And to me, and I only again speak for myself, it feels a little bit Orwellian to me, as if sort of an Animal Farm version of some residential taxpayers are equal, but not all, pardon me, I'm butchering what I was supposed to say, but that all residential taxpayers are not all equal to others. And again, I just misstated that part of me, but setting aside what someone will specifically pay, I wanted to share with you, we have 4,903 residential properties in the town of Newcastle, those that are in the Chappaqua School District. The median assessed full market value is $871,000. The median school tax bill is $19,075. The median school tax bill for a condominium is $5,414. And if you break out the average school tax bill for some of the complexes, Riverwoods is $8,967, Pheasant Run $4,374, Ledgewood Commons $5,587, Chestnut Oaks $4,953, Chappaqua Commons $5,820, King Street Hill Condos $5,423, and Old Farm Lake $5,258. If you look at fair share, only 8% of our taxpayers are paying quote unquote fair share of this $30,000+ number that we've been given for the school district. So roughly $34,000, only 8%. So arguably none of us are paying our fair share if we're looking at it from that perspective. And I don't need to break the rest of it down right now, but if you were to have a 40-unit building, based on my discussion with Josh Herman, with averaging $3,000 per rent, you would have approximately $250,000 in school district dollars in terms of taxable revenue. Obviously, if you broke that in half, you'd half that down more and more. I share this all with you is because we have to understand that, yes, taxes are important. Yes, we have to be cognizant of this, but I think we have to really take a deep dive into the numbers so people can understand and everyone can understand the impacts of what we are considering. And if we shrink it in size, how that shrinks as well. This is just the beginning of our discussion in terms of the new version and the potential version of the form-based code. It by no means is the final one. I would ask that the comments and statements about us being corrupt or being in bed with developers and the echo chamber that we all have, and we're all guilty of it, stop. Instead of rushing to Facebook and posting things that are not necessarily fact or you haven't done your homework, stop. Contact the town board. We are more than willing and more than interested in making sure that information is correct. We don't have to agree, but at least making sure the accurate information is out there. We want to work together. We will work together. We will get this done. I'm excited to get this done. We're grateful for your involvement, and we hope that you will consider staying involved and working with us as we work through the form-based code. And I thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Jeremy. I'll turn next to Councilmember Lisa Katz.
Okay, Jeremy said a lot, so I'm not going to repeat all of that. I guess what I want to start out saying to all the residents and property owners in Newcastle who are, have given us comments posted on Facebook, etc., is I appreciate your passion for this. And I love that no matter how you feel about this project, that you are willing to voice your concerns, because that really changes, how we may think about that. The town board is faced with what I believe to be sort of an impossible task, right? We're trying to figure out how to diversify our town, how to increase commerce and enhance the Chappaqua Hamlet, all while maintaining the quality of our school system and maintaining the bucolic feel of the town that we all love. That's a hard thing to do. So I really want everyone to know that this form-based code is a stab at getting that done. And like Jeremy said, it is the first iteration. It will 100% change, in large part based upon comments that we've received from all of you. So, when I've said a few times that we are listening and questioning, we are. And it wasn't the time before to really voice our opinions. We wanted to take the time to listen to you. Now, tonight, we're actually going to sit down and talk about some of the changes that we're thinking of based upon all of your views. We may adopt an amended form-based code. We may decide we're not adopting at all, but what we want to do is make sure that we get it right. And I'm not going to go through as much as Jeremy did, but I will let people know that I do have questions about, the impact on our school system. I do have questions about uses of retail that may come in. I have questions about how much construction are we going to allow in the hamlet at any given time? Are we going to limit the number of permits? The height restrictions, the taxes, traffic. I mean, honestly, when Chappaqua Crossing was built, they said it was an F level in downtown. It is not fully built. You can't get that much worse than an F. So how is this going to impact it? What kind of future impact can we give to the planning board? I'm not in favor of cutting them out completely. What type of affordable housing are we gonna mandate? There's a lot of questions that have arisen, and a lot of things that we as a town board are discussing. And I just want everyone to know that we are not the town board is not sitting in our evil lair figuring out how we're gonna, adversely impact downtown Chappaqua. We're actually doing the opposite and trying to figure out, in this impossible situation, how to make it the best we can make it. So, with that said, I will stop talking. You will hear us discuss, but, please know that we are listening and we will continue to listen. And we want you to continue to, let us know what your input is. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. You made me laugh. The next person we're going to hear from is Councilwoman Lauren Levin.
Thanks, Ivy. Well, campaigning last year, I was super lucky to meet new people all over town, folks I would never have met if I didn't run for office. I met with the department heads at Town Hall. I met with members from the Rotary Club and the Newcastle Historical Society. I had coffee with Rob Fleischer, an airport advisory member. I had lunch with Warren Messner from the school board. He said to me, that was so potent, what people forget is that our town is comprised of all these different things. Our schools are part of the town. And what I interpreted it as is that we are one community, we are one town. He impressed upon me the importance of collaboration, communication, and overall the importance of working towards consensus. And I was really excited about that. I was super excited to work with the school board. And so here we are in this process, reviewing incredibly important legislation. What makes us a better community is that we work together. We work through the challenges, the disagreements, and find a way to move forward. We must continue to work collaboratively so we can make this town a better place, the best version of itself. I've spent numerous hours researching other towns in New York that have adopted form-based codes: Malta, Saratoga Springs, Ithaca, the Hamptons, just to name a few. Malta, for example, has had a form-based code for 7 years. I've also spent numerous hours speaking with my neighbors. We all live in the hamlet, the merchants and friends with young children who will live here for a long time. It has been extremely helpful and truly rewarding, and I continue to welcome those conversations. My goal is that we create the best version of this legislation by working together. So thank you, and I'm really excited about this meeting.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself there. So thank you very much. I'm the last one to speak, and everybody did a really outstanding job, and you all actually captured a lot of my thoughts about where we are in this process and the work that we have ahead of us. I did just want to say a couple of things, my kind of own reflections on this. I feel like I'm a bit of a broken record, but it really does bear repeating that the form-based code is zoning legislation, and it's not a development plan. The business district today is entirely zoned as business retail or planned industrial. The form-based code is going to change the zoning to allow for different kinds of uses like residential and mixed use. It's focused on the form of the building as opposed to the use. And this is so important, and it's often overlooked in these discussions. The code includes detailed design guidelines that will give the hamlet a beautiful and consistent look and feel, so that what gets built is quaint and charming and fits with the character of the community. I understand that there are things that are in the form-based code that are troubling to residents, and there are things that are troubling to me too. So the idea of 5-story buildings, even with the very limited number of locations that they're proposed today, and the requirement that the 5th story must be in an occupied roof line or setback. This notion of 5-story buildings is something that I have questioned all along. I know that Lisa and Jeremy have as well prior to this year. And the DGIS, as well as the feedback from the public, have only increased my concerns about 5-story buildings. Another thing that is concerning to me is the limited role of the planning board. Jeremy and Lisa both spoke to this earlier. That gives me pause as well. I want to try to strike a balance between streamlining the process for development in some situations where it makes sense, while appropriately including the planning board for oversight of larger scale projects. Another thing that I'm going to be looking to our consultants to analyze further is the impact that an increase in school age kids might have on our tax bills for those of us who live in single family homes. I would just note that our consultants to date have set forth that an increase in the commercial tax base would shift the burden away from homeowners. And so based on the concerns of the residents that we've been listening to, I need a harder look at this question. So these are just 3 examples of things that I want to discuss, and I actually have pages and pages of notes and things that I want to go through, and so I don't really want to delay this kind of deeper dive into the issues any longer. But I will just say in conclusion that this process has been really awesome. The level of community engagement that we've seen is really incredible. And I know that there are people who oppose the form-based code, but I just ask everyone to please keep in mind that we are refining the draft. And so if you agree that the zoning today is restrictive, and if you support residential and mixed uses in the hamlet, and if you support the idea of a compact, walkable, quaint, charming downtown, this process is still for you. And so we invite you to join with us and to participate as we continue to evolve and improve the form-based code. So that said, I think we're ready to kind of jump into the meat of this conversation. I'm going to share my screen. I have created a list with the town board of sort of topic areas that I think we need to go through and discuss. I would just note for everyone that just because something's not on the list doesn't mean it's not worthy of further analysis or wouldn't be included in our recommendations to the consultants with regard to the additional analyses that need to accompany the FGEIS. There are some topics like the CCSD school capacity analysis, for example, that are being dealt with by interested agencies or have been sort of thoroughly covered by the public comments that we've received to date. And so I did not include those on my list. So I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me. Okay, can everybody see? Yeah, okay. All right, so based on the kind of initial review that we did of the form-based code, these are some areas that I wanted to get through that I've noted for myself that I want to have conversations about. So, and Lauren helped me to sort of put these into categories so that we weren't just rambling from one conversation to the next. So in the sort of administration and process bucket, the approval process, the role of the planning board, both the town planning board as well as the county planning board, the neighbor notification process, the question of whether we can phase development and fees. In the bucket we're calling regulating plan, defining the study area, looking at the question of building heights, considerations for 149 King Street and the King Street Hill and the question of steep slopes and how they're treated under, ooh, uh-oh. Did you guys lose my screen? Ah, there we go. In the category of housing and retail, affordable and workforce housing, how we estimated the number of units and the number of bedrooms in the form-based code, as how we estimated the number of school-age children, and this question of tax revenue and what we would anticipate seeing. In a bucket we've called impacts, looking at traffic issues, parking issues, how we might support existing merchants and tenants, the impacts of COVID-19 and how they might come into play in terms of the form-based code and the DGEIS, as well as the profitability question and the market scan that underlies that. And then lastly, in a bucket we're calling development and architecture regulations, we have sidewalks, green buildings, architectural styles. So I'll just pause here for a second. Does anyone on the town board have anything they want to add to this list right now?
I would say in light of the fact that we're not going to get through everything anyway, we have ample time to add, but I'm good for now.
I'm good for now too, Ivy. Lisa just had to grab her glasses because her contact fell out, so she'll be right back.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I definitely think we can kind of continue to add to this as we move forward and have these conversations. I should just check. Jill and Sabrina, did you guys have anything you wanted to add to this list?
No, I think that it's a good list. I do want to say, though, I think it's great, Ivy, that you put them into buckets, but also realize that there's crossover between buckets when you start talking about issues. And I think that's important to point out.
And reiterate, this is not, I don't want anyone to take this and post it and say, look, they didn't discuss this, they didn't look at that. This is
it's a starting point, folks.
Starting point. We can add to it.
We will, I'm sure, not can.
Okay, great. So why don't we go ahead then, and why don't we go ahead and we'll start kind of in this first category of the sort of administration and approval. And so, I'm actually, Lauren, Jeremy, you wanted to jump in. You want to say something? Oh, okay. You're just ready to go. Lauren, I was actually going to ask you to introduce the topic around the approval process and the question that you wanted to discuss there, because that one came from you.
For sure. And so historically, I do want to share with folks on the call that the town of Newcastle has had a reputation of a difficult approval process where whether it's a homeowner or a commercial property owner or of a small business, they're just the ways in which to go through the process is just very unpredictable and frustrating. For example, you submit an application and then 8 weeks later you receive notes that you gotta edit certain things and you gotta receive updates. So with the form-based code, what we're trying to create here is a predictable process so that up front we can say to these applicants, this is what you need to check off your list before you can even walk into the building. So I sort of did a side-by-side of different form-based codes with what our current DGIS looks at. And I really found the Malta form-based code super helpful in the way that they process the applications. So in the current DGIS, the process is concept review, schematic design, design development review. What I think that we can replicate that I think has been helpful to Malta, especially after speaking with their planner, they've bucketed as pre-application conference, conceptual review, and the conceptual review includes the planning board component where they host a public hearing for each project. And lastly, completeness review. So I also found that the public hearing as it relates to the planning board was super critical, because I think all of us on the town board agree that we certainly do not want to eliminate that level of approval process, because we really have value in the planning board and their expertise in this. We think that all the folks on the planning board have worked tremendously in maintaining the character of our town, as well as just, functionally, they're just experts and we need them. So, this is something to certainly look at, and that was pretty much where my thought process was with this.
So I don't know, how do you want to?
Does anybody have any thoughts or comments on that, including Sabrina? I don't know if you want to jump in and, okay.
Well, I think to Lauren's point, and something I briefly mentioned, and I know you and I had briefly discussed as well, is there a way to make sure that we keep these processes still there to some extent? I believe, and if I'm wrong, certain people can correct me, but one of the reasons why we have the form-based code is not what people believe, to have these enormous developers come in and buy huge tracts of land and make a huge skyscraper here, but to help current business owners too, and current building owners, pardon me, property owners, to enable them, if they want to go up some floors, they want to maximize or provide better use for their property. So one of the things that, to Lauren's point, and you and I have discussed as well, is there a way, for example, to say, well, the form-based code in its purest form will apply solely to 15 units and smaller in terms of the potential build. I'm making that up. Don't use that as a quote, but in terms of the process that has to go back before the planning board if it's a larger structure, if there's more units. So if someone wants to build 20 or 30 units, then it may have to go back before the planning board. You're looking at me that you're not understanding what I'm saying. Is that am I misreading you, Ivy?
Me? Oh no, I'm trying to figure out how to get my how to get my notes on one screen and my Zoom on the other.
Okay. So the point being that for the smaller projects, if you will, and especially those people who currently own property, it's an easier process as opposed to someone who wants to aggregate properties, for example, or build, we'll call it to the maximum. And then the possibility that there's an advisory role that, even if it's not mandatory in the sense that they have to listen, if you will, that any project at some point, even if it's just once, goes before the planning board, just to have that conversation and allow the community to have some input one way or another. I don't know how you facilitate that, Sabrina, but as a possibility.
Listen, I am listening tonight to what you guys are saying. I have read all of the public comments that have come in. There will be changes, and this is, solution that fits Newcastle in regards to this issue is critical, and the planning board is weighing in on it. There will be a way to address this issue from several different perspectives, and as part of the process, as we get to the final environmental impact statement, as we look to what the findings will be from the town board, these are all things that are going to shape a revision of the current draft code to shape it how you guys want it. So Jeremy, you raised the issue of number of units. There may be an issue of lot size that triggers a review. It really depends what is the appropriate metric to involve or invoke a more higher level review. And we will be examining that level of detail as we move through this process. Absolutely.
That's great. That's something that the planning board can certainly help us with, because that's their wheelhouse, not ours, in terms of their knowledge and experience.
We had a recommendation that came from the county planning board. And we're kind of jumping to the second topic.
Wait,
but
can we get back to this one for once?
Yeah, no. It's related to the planning board. So but the county had come in with a recommendation stating that requesting that we refer applications to the county planning board for any that exceeded 7,000 square feet of building area, or anything that would trigger that 3-step application review process that's outlined in the form-based code. And so I think we may want to think about extending that to include our local. That I don't know how they came up with 7,000, whether that's an industry sort of metric that they used, but I thought that was an interesting concept and potentially one that we could use for our own planning board as well. Sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
What you might want to do is, what I'm hearing from the comments and what I've heard before is maybe as suggestions from staff, Sabrina and I get together and sort of look at this and see what level of projects might trigger a different type of review. That's sort of what the comment and feedback I'm hearing. So maybe we can give you some guidance in that by breaking it down into whether it's a residential project, a commercial project, the mix, what are the different options to give you a menu and help you with that decision tree, so to speak, and taking into account the county comments as well as the comments from the public and the board that we've heard. So we can come back to you with something so you can then give us more direction.
Yeah, I think that there's several different ways that you can cut the pie, if you will. And we will provide you with the selection that makes the most sense for Newcastle based on the makeup of Newcastle. I read comment too, and I wondered where the 7,000 comes from. Looking at the size of properties, we have very small individual properties in the hamlet. Some properties that, if they add a couple of stories, and they have a total of 6 units, the question is what kind of process on a 1,200 square foot lot that property should go through, as opposed to a 15,000 square foot lot. And so we will, on the staff level, working with the consultant team, provide you with the metrics that we think can be used and make sure you have a menu to choose from as to how you want to incorporate it into the code.
So I agree with that. And I think that would be helpful for us to look at. Another thing is, I think we're trying to strike the balance between helping the planning board so they don't need to go through a year or more review on any proposed construction, which is frankly is inhibiting, even under our current zoning, somebody from wanting to do something, knowing they're going to have to go through that but then on the other hand, we don't want them to lose control. So maybe we could also talk to the planning board and see, are there issues that they really get stuck on that we might be able to incorporate into the form-based code now, so that it's something that they don't need to worry about. We've already kind of pre-approved whatever that may be, and then left them the discretion on other items that maybe, are ones that we that are a little more discretionary, that we really want their input on.
One thing that I saw in some of the public comments that came in, and I apologize, for many of these, I flagged who said them, and for whatever reason, I didn't flag who said this, so I apologize. So I'm stealing this from somebody in the public and not giving them not giving them a citation. But anyway, somebody came in and suggested that we do sort of, as a part of the FGEIS, to include sort of a side-by-side comparison of the kind of step-by-step process of what exists today versus what might exist in the future. And it sounds like there might be a couple of versions of that if we're now, including, size qualifiers around the involvement of the planning board. But I thought this was really interesting to sort of map out, this is what it looks like today, this is what it would look like for the future, and take sort of a hypothetical development and show on a sort of a process diagram what that would look like.
I think if you're going to go through that discussion, which is a good one, you also need to then have an understanding or an overview of what additional guidance is provided by the form-based code. Because remember, the Euclidean zoning really just gives you the box that then gets filled in during the site plan. Here, we're giving you the box and the ingredients and telling you what you need to do. So that needs to be part of that discussion because the process will look completely different for a reason. And so a lot of the discussions that will be had during typical site plan review are being had now with respect to the language in the form-based code. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Can
it
I
does.
just ask a question? When you were looking at the other codes, Southampton, Malta, Saratoga Springs, do any of those have that gradual, interim steps for, full review at one stage for a much larger project, more modest reviews depending upon the,
Actually, I'm sorry, Jill. They all across the board just have the planning board as a public hearing because they found that, and I hate to jump, but it also includes, the opportunity for adjacencies and neighbors to attend these public hearings. And a lot of these municipalities just found it very, appropriate for the planning board to host this public hearing so that the neighbors and the adjacent properties can attend and vocalize their issues with the project or vocalize, whatever it can be. So none of the form-based codes that I've read have said that, it requires a certain amount of square footage. It's just a blanket. This is what the process is.
Well, I think maybe that leads us nicely into the next topic that we were going to discuss, which is neighbor notification. If that makes sense to move on. So I had flagged neighbor notification as something that I wanted to discuss because we received some comments, and I did attribute this one. This one came from Mara Van Fleet, who talked about whether we could expand the neighbor notification area. Currently, it's limited to the adjacent neighbors. And the question was whether we could figure out sort of an appropriate transition zone or all of the transition zone as being people who would be specifically notified so that they would be able to come in, whether it's via the public hearing or it's to be able to meet with the planning and development department to discuss the application. But so thinking about what that neighbor notification looks like and whether that could be expanded. And then someone else had mentioned, and I thought this was excellent as well, an idea about having a page on the town's website where we would be posting information publicly, having a sort of portal that we could create for sort of the form-based development projects that are happening so that people could track those. So those were the things that I had flagged about neighbor notification. I don't know if anybody else has anything they want to add to that.
Well, I agree with that. I think more important than notification, though, is it has to have some teeth. If it's just that they get notified and they can come in and talk, but nobody's really listening because it's already basically been approved, that's not so helpful, just a notification. They need to be able to come in and potentially change the project, which I don't know that it allows for right now. Because, there may be, just like we had all those people at 147 who came in and said, well, this is going to seriously impact the sight lines from my bedroom window right outside my back. What's along North Greeley. We may not necessarily be contemplating that right now, but somebody who's actually living in the building right next to where something's going to be built may have a view or a legitimate concern on a particular project that would need to be changed.
The question I have as to that is the public has a right to be heard. Ultimately, they're not controlling. It's obviously in this case, it would be the planning board, for example. But I think you need to have a balance in terms of neighbor notification and neighbors allowing their input, because otherwise it just starts back at point one again. So we just have to think creatively how we build in those protections. Is it, and again, I don't know the answer because it's not my wheelhouse, but is it the proximity to another property? Is it the size of the property? Does it have to do with the lot size? There's a lot of different factors
So we have
consideration.
our existing code right now, which requires different neighbor notifications for the different types of projects. So it's not unheard of to create our own measurement of neighbor notification. And typically neighbors are notified that there is a project in their, in that area. And, and if in this case, if we change it to allow the planning board to conduct a public hearing, they would be invited to that public hearing to comment. I can tell you at any time a neighbor who is affected by a project, they do contact my office and they speak with staff and we walk them through the file. It's a normal course of business.
Yeah, I just want to build on Sabrina's comments, right? I mean, she's correct. The neighbors don't presently have the right to change a project. They have the ability to have an impact on it through public comment, and that's not being changed. They still have the ability. It's just who's hearing those comments is changing now, and it's not in a public hearing form. So I think, again, maybe we can give back the board some guidance as to how we could modify that. And I think you're going to look at larger projects might be one criteria.
Yeah, but I think, Nick, you also have to recognize that a public hearing before the planning board versus being allowed to walk into Sabrina's office and talk to her, those are not the same thing. They don't have the same feel. Yeah.
That's correct, yes. So we have to see how can we come up with
Sorry,
a way.
Sabrina, I love you. I love walking into your office.
No worries, no offense taken. But again, depending on how the code is written, it really, and I will speak on behalf of my staff, if there is a board that is responsible for issuing a permit or reviewing a project, staff's comments are guidance only. We are not decision makers. We implement the code and we defer to the decision makers regarding the project. And so the environmental record in relation to the form-based code is in many instances creating the guidance with which projects shall adhere to. So I just want to put that out there because, no offense, we work for the community, we implement the town's codes, and, we direct the public and the applicants in the direction that the code requires us to.
Anyone else on neighbor notification? Okay. The next topic area that we'd flagged, I'm sorry, I can't kind of bounce back and forth between all my documents that I have open on my computer. The next area that we'd flagged was phasing for development. And I'm actually just scrolling through my notes right now to find. So the questions that I had around phasing for development is whether it's possible to consider. This is really a question for, I guess, for Sabrina and Nick, whether it's possible to have a phased approach to the form-based code. And if yes, what the kind of benefits and drawbacks of that would be. I know from talking to you both that when it comes to additions to the form-based district, that parcels can be added to the district in the future. Or I'm sorry, that the size of what's currently in the study area is I'm not saying this correctly. But my question is just with regard to whether it's possible in the future to add parcels to the district without a DGEIS if they were studied as a part of this round. Does that make sense? Because my question is really around how do we sort of throttle development so that we're not experiencing too much simultaneous development. And so is there a way to roll this out in phases where we start with, let's say, one area, two or three of those areas within the kind of regulating plans, and then roll them out periodically over time? Is that even a concept that one's able to consider?
And before you answer that, another thought to go along with that is, instead of doing that, is it possible to limit the number of open permits for exterior work, for instance, at any given time open in the hamlet? Because the last thing I think any of us want to do is have what's essentially a downtown infrastructure project where every other building is having significant work done. So maybe if we can't do the phasing, which I don't know if that gets us there, because if we say, well, this street, we still don't want everyone on that street doing it. Like, can we limit the number of open permits at any given time?
That's a great
For
idea.
exterior work, not like redoing a kitchen, but inside, but for anything that would impact the neighborhood.
And that goes back, to stick with that topic, nothing, no attack against what is the Fuller house, the house that is being built on King now for years. It's been not done. I mean, we have to also have a policy in place that if you are not done by a certain time, there's got to be consequences, because you can't have these permits open in perpetuity. It's just not conducive to making things be efficient and working the right way.
So let me address some of the multi-part questions that has been put on the table. And we're going to start with Jeremy's last, because that's most fresh in my memory. In terms of limiting and because of construction, we can go through that with the existing code. We can make it more clear that, for example, exterior work needs to be completed within X number of months. Because right now, a building permit, I forget the exact time period, but let's say it's 2 years or it's 18 months. Maybe you can say the building permit is valid for 18 months, but exterior work and the staging of materials outside needs to be completed within X number of months, because those are the impacts you're concerned about. If sheetrocking of an inside of the building or running the wiring inside takes an extended period of time, less of an impact to the community. The impact is really from when they're putting the frame of the building up and they're bringing materials in. And you could also put conditions that they need to show a phasing plan. How are they doing this construction? How are they staging the materials? Where's the construction workers parking? Where's the equipment coming in? So we can address that in the existing code. And it may be something you want to do in other parts of the town as well as in the form-based code.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with Nick. There's the area for those type of changes is in the existing building code. I think it can be specified within the form-based code as well, but the nuts and bolts of that falls under the jurisdiction of a building permit.
As far as the next question about limiting the number of open permits, I've got to give that some more thought as to how if you can regulate phasing. Basically, once you give the property rights and the development is allowed, there would have to be a reason why some person could not get the same benefit that another property owner has. Is that because they can't meet the requirements of demonstrating that they would be able to stage their construction material and work on a site without blocking the sidewalk or without blocking the street, because there are two projects going up next to each other and that's just not practical? Maybe that's a limiting factor. So we can work in coming up with a criteria rather than a number of permits. You can't say we don't want 10 projects, because maybe 10 projects in different areas can actually be managed without having the impacts, and the law protects those rights. So there has to be a rational basis. And I think we can identify what the impacts. You're not concerned about the number of projects, you're concerned about the impacts, whether that impact is from 2 projects or whether it's from 6 projects. So we need to look at the impacts, and we pretty much know what those are and what that would be. So I think Sabrina and I, and with the building department and Tom, we can work on coming up with some language. In terms of one of the initial questions about the areas of a number of parcels and the phasing, what you're doing is examining a rezoning. In essence, you're changing the zoning districts of the existing parcels from what they currently are in terms of the uses that are allowed. So you could decide in the DGIS and the FGIS, the secret process, to study the entire study area. And then when it comes time and you study the impacts, you issue a finding statement that looks at all the impacts and comes up with the mitigation measures. But then when you vote on the form-based code, you may say, we want to limit the area that, even though we've studied X acres, we want to do only 5 of those acres or 4 of those acres, or only this block area. And you would do that at the time you adopt the form-based code and you apply it to the properties. And the benefit of doing it that way is that in a year or so, or 2 years or 3 years, whatever the time period is, you can then expand that area, and you might just have to do a supplemental environmental review because you've done the generic environmental review, you've taken a hard look, you've set forth your reasoned elaboration as to what the impacts are and how they would be mitigated. And it would then be a different process and a more focused process to see, have the impacts changed from what was studied during the DGIS, and now that you have some new development, and now this is being proposed. So you have that ability to go through the full process now, and then at the time you decide to consider the form-based code itself, modify what those areas are. It does not have, it's not an all or nothing proposition.
Is that a better approach than doing, because are you putting yourself in a position that you're going to have this confrontational dispute, because that's unfortunately what it started as, and hopefully it will not end that way with the community and whatever town board is sitting, to revisit this all over again every 2, 4, 5 years? That's a nightmare. It'll just defeat the purpose of being productive and trying to think holistically for the community. So the question is it worthy of consideration, or does it work that everything gets done, but and I think this is what Ivy was getting at before, if I'm wrong, it's the first 2 years only X can be done. The next 2 years only Y can be done. And if it's not appropriate, there can be a moratorium, as opposed to saying every year or two, you're gonna have to start this process all over, because you'll make it come to a screeching halt.
Well, there's a couple of comments there, Jeremy. One is that you do have the right to modify your local law. It's relatively easy to roll this back, because you don't have to do a secret review to undo it necessarily. You would, but it'd be a little different. You can change the zoning back. You can upzone it. You could remove some of the zoning. You could change the density, and it's a much easier process than what you're doing now. You always have that option and that ability to do so. It's within your discretion. The other thing to keep in mind is that you don't control which property is going to get sold, which ones are ready to be developed. So there are many a good comprehensive plan and many a good zoning codes that planners create that sit on a bookshelf and never get implemented because it didn't meet the actual what the development community or what the property owners actually had in mind. So you may decide just to do it in one area, but you're neglecting the area that actually is more likely to be developed sooner rather than later. And when you have time, if all of a sudden you see 10 projects are coming in or 4 projects are coming in, you can roll back the development. It's harder to, however, you're not going to know what projects aren't going to get built if the zoning isn't there. You shut the door.
Right, so I'm misunderstanding, and I apologize.
He's agreeing with you.
Okay, there you go. Thank you. I wasn't understanding.
Yes, and I mean, basically he agreed with you that it might be an easier way to get at the it might be an easier mechanism to control the rate of development by sort of clawing back or what's already been instituted, as opposed to trying to hold it and then doing it in phases. I still want to think about it, but I appreciate it.
Except, Nick, isn't the problem, I mean, you're not, as you said, you're not going to know what's not going to be developed. So you can't wait until people want to develop and then say, oh, no, forget it. We're going to claw it back right now. To me, that seems like a bigger problem. I think, isn't it easier to get at, we're going to, we can do the zoning and either say, absolutely, it's not applying to these areas right now, or put something in the code where the town board has to go for a next step where they have to create a resolution, say now it's going to apply to these areas once we see kind of how it's working. And I do still think we would need to limit the number of permits, at least in a given area, outstanding, because
I think
that would just be terrible.
Right, we need to look at that criteria, and I think that can be developed to address that concern. As far as the phase, I think I need to give it some more thought and speak with Sabrina. And I really wanted to sort of get some input from you. I've heard the public's input, and I have some thoughts, but let me think them through some more before we speak.
Yeah, I think you hear what the concern is, and we're just all kind of trying to suggest different ways of how do you limit the rate of development.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Lauren, I'm sorry, Lauren, you've been a little quiet. I just want to make sure, did you have anything on that topic?
No, you guys covered it.
The next topic is actually yours, which is why I was looking at you, which is the topic on fees.
Yes, and so Sabrina, I apologize if I missed this, but there was a note that I saw in the Hamptons form-based code where they added a performance bond, which means the applicant may be required to post performance bonds in sufficient amounts that making sure that all the items are covered by the application and are completed in accordance with acceptable standards, specifications, and procedure acceptable to the town. So I liked this clause just because it adds like another layer of protection, as well as like as it relates to, you know, the sidewalks and the streets, making sure that, you know, we hold money. I guess, is it called escrow? I apologize if I'm butchering that.
And the METs are currently in the town site plan and subdivision regulations. We need to make sure it's included and carried over into the form-based code. But typically, whenever there's a public improvement, whether it's a sidewalk, a road extension,
Yeah.
a new water main, a new sewer main, prior to the issuance of the building permit, the property owner, the applicant's required to post a performance bond so that in the event they dig a hole and then walk away from it, the town can use that bond, call the bond, and have the public infrastructure completed.
Right.
Correct.
So we'll need to make sure that's in there.
But the other thing too was it also provides protection for, you know, buildings that are, you know, to make sure that the materials they use, it's not like vinyl siding, it's like good, you know, the materials that are appropriate, that do stand the test of time.
That
Again,
comes into play in the building permit.
okay.
And if you have that,
But also there are, through the environmental, there has been specifications, and that gets to the design requirements that are in the actual code
Got it.
that need to be followed through to the building permit.
Got it.
And that then is hand in hand with like the inspection when they're doing
Yes.
the work. They wouldn't get a CO if it was not correct material
Right.
or.
The zoning does not replace the need to obtain a building permit. And then there's a process through the building permit where you get your C of O. And whatever happens from the actual zone to submission of a building permit, everything that is within those plans has to conform to the requirements of the code. And then it is ensured that by the time they get to certificate of occupancy, that everything has been adhered to.
Thanks.
But
Laura,
Laura
if
was
you could just send me that language, I'd like to take a look at it. Thank you.
Yeah, because she was almost speaking as if it was a maintenance bond.
Yes, right.
Well, I think there's different things when it comes to fees, you know, and part of the fees can associate with mitigation of things that are identified during the environmental review. And, you know, even there will be just, I think the idea of the maintenance of the making sure the building materials are what they should be, parcel to making sure that the code actually specifies. And if the code doesn't specify that it relates to another trigger that the town has in relation to a building permit. And Nick and I can definitely, you know, work on that and make sure that we can find good places for that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with a maintenance bond when it comes to, you know, making sure that whatever improvements they make on public property, you know, lasts for a minimum of 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. But I was unfamiliar with it when it comes to a private.
We don't have it in
building.
private. We don't have it in private. The farthest we can go in private is the design
Right.
that we are
And
looking at.
requiring materials. Okay.
Right, when they go to the architectural review board and they look at certain materials that are being used and the asks, which is why the code includes the architectural standards and the design aspects that it does. It's the first time we've ever been considering codifying design. So it's a big change.
Does anyone else have comments on fees? No. I'm gonna just briefly share my screen again. So sorry, I'm trying to get this to go full screen. So that actually completes the topics that we had in this sort of administration and process bucket. Did anybody have any other thoughts in this sort of topic area before we move to the next?
I had one quick question, which I don't even know if it's a thing or if it would help at all. But if we appointed the town board as lead agency on some of these, on potential development projects, wouldn't that inherently maybe take out some of the issues with the length of projects being in front of a planning board and put them in more of an advisory capacity and let the town board sort of move ahead potentially quicker with some projects as long as they met the zoning and form-based code requirements? Like if we were, in order to find a hybrid where if we don't want to do as much as is in this code, but we're trying to get to the goal of getting some development done quicker, appropriate development done quicker. Does that help to put the town board as the lead agency on these at all?
Well, in terms of the lead agency, the secret review will have been completed. So I think what you're suggesting is maybe they become the approval authority, if you will, in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
And there are communities that have done that with other projects where the planning board is the approval authority, but if you're over a certain number of acres, it then goes to the legislative body. I will tell you from general experience, the legislative body doesn't do a good as a role, in my opinion, in acting as a planning board because your agendas are busier. You're not dealing with planning issues on a particular basis. And the difference in terms of a review between an appointed board versus an elected board, the political process comes more into play. You have that authority, you could do so. I generally see that slows the process down rather than enhances it.
Okay. So I think we'll close for now the administration and process bucket. I feel a little bit like I'm, doing Jeopardy. Like, I'll take regulating plan for 200. So should we move on to regulating plan? The topics are, and then I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can pull up my notes again. The topics are defining the study area, building heights, and then considerations for 149 King Street and the King Street Hill and steep slopes. And I'm actually going to just take one moment before we jump in on that to say that I think maybe what we'll try to do is get through this second bucket, and then probably we'll call it a night for this conversation, because I know we're not going to be able to get through everything on this list this evening. And Jill and I were going to be looking at opportunities on future work sessions to be continuing this.
Also, and Ivy, just to remind people that even though we closed on a bucket, and I think it's critically important to say it again, people can obviously comment on what we've said and share more questions or comments in general as to these closed out buckets. For sure.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. So as far as defining the study area, this actually, I had flagged this as something that I wanted to talk about based on some comments that came in. These comments came from Maggie Christ, who talked about, and I know, Sabrina, that this has come up in our conversations to date, and yet I couldn't remember how to respond to this question, which is that we know that there are certain parcels where we don't intend to ever have future development. So, the Greeley house comes to mind.
Certain public or quasi-public parcels.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so the question is, right, why are those included in the rezoning if we know that they're never actually going to be redeveloped?
Sabrina, if I can jump in. Yeah, I do. So legally, all property needs to lie within the zone. All property is within a zoning district, whether it's municipally owned or not-for-profit owned, or whether it's a cemetery in the midst of a residential zone. All property is within a zoning district. So we could not have property outside of a district. Doesn't exist. It has to lie or sit somewhere within a zoning district.
And so the reason that they're in this zoning district is because they were in the previous zoning district that we're looking to replace.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Did anybody else have questions about the sort of how do we define the study area? I mean, we touched on this a little bit earlier, so this bleeds a little bit into the conversation that we were having earlier with regard to phasing. I think, and also to some of the conversations we're going to have coming up about, the King Street Hill and impacts on 149 King Street. So I don't know if we want to just put a pin in this and come back. Go ahead, sorry.
You're talking the geographic scope?
Yeah, defining the size and the boundaries of the study area.
I think everyone's got a view on that about how far it should go and where it should go. I mean, I'm sure if you even polled the community, even those who are in support of the form-based code have different views on it. But I'm happy to pin it as part of a future conversation.
Okay, fair enough. So then we've come to everyone's favorite topic, which is building heights. So maybe I'll start, and then everybody can kind of jump in and share your thoughts about building heights. I kind of alluded to this in the comments that I made at the top of the call. I mean, my feeling has been that anything over 4 stories, I'm not sure fits with the character of the community. And even though it has been suggested to me before that the sort of relative size of a 5-story building, when you consider the fact that the 5th story must be in an occupied roof line or set back, that it wouldn't have the impact that I'm imagining in my head. I still, when I review the DGIS, have real concerns about that. And so, that's my position. I'm keeping an open mind, like I said at the top of the call, and I welcome the public to continue to provide feedback on this. So it's not as though I'm set in stone, but I continue to have real concerns about 5 stories. And in fact, I would prefer to see 4 stories as the maximum height. And I'd even really love to entertain whether it's possible to do that 4th story as an occupied roof line or a setback, which would, give the appearance of being something more along the lines of what a 3-story building would look like under our current code. So that's my thinking on height. I'm sure everybody wants to weigh in on this.
Actually, Ivy, since a lot of my neighbors, we live right in town. We live actually behind Bell School, and I agree with you that 5 stories is just not keeping with the character of the town, and numerous people have vocalized that through the public comment portal and as well as vocally in person. In fact, going to flag football, the first thing they say is no 5 stories. So I completely and wholeheartedly agree with that. I do think that it's really important. I think what's a little bit frustrating about the form-based code right now is that some of the staff, like the naming of the districts, it kind of seems like a misnomer, because like F5, a lot of folks would attribute that to 5 stories, but it doesn't. But for me, I think what would be a little bit simpler is to establish certain parcels of land, particularly like the heart of downtown, like what I consider the cross street of King and Greeley, right at the traffic light, especially because the Greeley house is right there. I would limit that to 2 to 3 stories, because again, 1 Greeley, which is where the Art Deco brick building where Great Stuff is currently 3 stories. So again, I think that right there makes sense that that's 2 to 3 stories. And then as we're kind of panning out away from the heart of downtown, to your point, Ivy, 4 stories with a setback would be appropriate, such as, whether it's further away from the main street of South Greeley and up to North Greeley, where the post office or where Rite Aid is. It just makes more sense to me that we preserve what we currently have and not overbuild there, because I particularly enjoy the beautiful view of the hills and the nature and the trees, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where I stand right now.
Yeah. Well, Lauren and I had talked about that, and I completely agree with that. I think that the center of town should be lower and then progressively get higher, potentially as we, get a little further out of where more of the, like where Rite Aid is and along North Greeley. I don't think 5 stories should be an option. I think it's way too tall for our town. But I think a 4-story potentially where Rite Aid is, or, a little further down would be okay. One thought was, maybe buildings down there don't necessarily have to have ground floor as retail. Part of the point is to get, have more diverse housing and to get more people on the streets here, that maybe, if you had a 4-story building on North Greeley, that could be fully apartments as opposed to having retail on the bottom.
I'm pretty sure it says that today. I think
we were saying
Susan Lawrence.
Yeah, past Susan Lawrence. That's what I'm talking about. But I 100% think 5 stories should not be an option. I was driving down King today, way too slow because I was counting all the stories on some of these buildings, and you'd be surprised. A lot of them already are 3 stories coming down King. So 3 or 4.
Yeah.
So, I think that the point is, and if you look at it, and we did pay a lot of attention to this, it's not going to be like New York City where you would have one giant, 4-story building that's going to span the length of a block. That's not kind of how we would even want that to look. But, I kind of implore our residents to take the time to actually look at some of those buildings. But I think as we move toward the center of town, I would like to see them lower, because I think that's what people are seeing. Everyone has a gut reaction to the quaint feeling of our town, and we like that. I think it could be, some of these are 1-story now and they could be taller, but I wouldn't mind seeing 2 to 3 in the center, more like where the traffic light is, and then progressively getting a little taller as we leave the actual center of the hamlet.
I guess I would just, so the center, the way that the center is defined, right, in the code is looking at the train station and then thinking about radiating out from there, which is odd for us to think about, right? Because the train station is not really the center right now. But I think that's the way that the code is defined. And so, I guess the one thing that, the one area that I go back and forth on with regard to sort of height limitations is the train station, because I feel like we don't know what we want to do there in the future. And when I say we, I don't mean like this current town board. I mean, we, like the town of Newcastle in the future wants to do there, because I don't think we have any desire to develop the train station parking lot. At least not in 2020. We got enough going on. So I guess there's a part of me that feels like I don't necessarily want to handcuff the town by limiting us too much with regard to what could be possible in that train station parking lot in the future. And actually, to that end, Sabrina, one of the things that I had flagged is that we have an area that's F5 minus in where lot B is today. And I was actually wondering if that's being even that as being a little too prescriptive, because in my mind, I see if the town were ever in a situation where we wanted to sell the train station parking lot and develop the train station parking lot, I see a public process where we would be inviting the community to come in and have design charrettes, and we'd be all working towards what do we want that 9 acres of land to look like in the future, and what would there be a civic center, would there be a new town hall, would there be a community center, would you have a public pool, which you would name the Ivy Pool, of course, and all of this would come in the future, but that it would be this sort of kind of marvelous community experience of designing that were it ever to come to pass. And so I just want to be careful not to be too limiting in a certain sense, because I want us to be able to have that sort of creative, mindful process together in the future, potentially.
So, and I just want to speak to the F5 minus. The F5 minus is no retail or commercial on the first floor. And it was kind of couched that way under the coding process, because if you recall, the center around the train station is really the center. And from the center, it becomes less dense as you move into the hamlet, up the hill and towards Washington Avenue. So that's why that particular parcel or area is F5 minus, because it didn't make sense to put commercial use right there. Even if there is a future of creating a community center, for lack of a better word, or an expanded community center, not a building, but a more many buildings or a more active site out of that area, it's still not considered commercial use. So that's the F5 minus. And listen, if you guys think it's too hamstringing, you know, that's what you can.
But why? I mean, why? Why? Like that's if we consider the center of town to be the train station, and that's the way we're redefining it, that's pretty close to the train station.
Yeah, but it heads in the other direction of a single family neighborhood.
Okay.
In another town.
To that point, I had kind of written in my notes here. I know, Nick, it's not the law, but if the town is going to sell property, it's subject to a permissive referendum. Yes. But could we legislate that we require a vote? Like we require
You would ask that
on the ballot to vote to sell something as large as the train station.
Yes, but only for our term, I think, right?
That was the concern, right? That you would be changing the law and binding future boards, and state law sets forth what that criteria is, that it's subject to a permissive referendum. So I do not believe, I did have to complete the research, but I do not believe you have that ability, because you would be binding future boards. And that's
But
the advice.
doesn't all legislation bind future boards? I mean, something can be, legislation can always be changed, but I would be interesting to have a board say, well, no, we're not going to require a vote on this. But I mean, all legislation binds future.
But here you're changing sort of the state law process that talks about how property is being sold, and you're then going above and beyond and doing something different. I'd have to look into it. I just haven't had that time. I apologize. But our initial response was no, you could not. But I'll consider your what you've suggested.
And just one more comment when we're talking about 3 and 4 stories and where they might be. I understand what we're talking about, that maybe when we're going up the hill, it would be taller than actually in town. But I think you want to be a little careful not to be putting 4-story buildings next to single family residential homes, because as you move out of the center of home, you're by necessity going into that transition zone. So you sort of want to be coming down in height and density as you blend in.
I want to point out that the code right now, as it, I'm sorry,
Doesn't
Jeremy.
allow. No. It doesn't-
Right.
It's 3-story.
It's 3.
So the 4-story.
Right.
And then if you mandated, assuming the lot size could allow it, that setback to even better increase the view shed and limit how it blocks anything else. But one thing I just wanted to point out, because when people hear 3 stories, we've dealt with this many times, and it's critical that people who are listening understand 3 stories is not 3 stories, meaning that depending on how much basement is above ground, that's going to be included in the calculation. So if it's 11.5 feet or whatever it may be, if you have 9 feet of basement that's exposed and it's part of that 50%, that's going to be included in that total height. So it's not 3 stories as we see it today. And to someone's point before, if you go up King and look up King now, you see numerous 3- and 4-story buildings. And Nick, I think we asked this of you before, not saying this is what we exactly want to do, but you can't say to a future or current landowner that you would have to build single home style properties sort of consistent with what is there now in those lots. You couldn't bind someone to say, even if you combine 2 lots, you can't have 2 or 3 lot long building. It would have to be separate buildings in the existing lots, even if you purchased all those lots.
And you're saying that we could not restrict from combining the lots?
Not from combining the lots. So if I wanted to buy 3 lots, that's great, but now I have this big, beautiful Victorian building. And then maybe another one right next door to it. Instead of allowing someone to knock down both beautiful Victorian buildings and put up one big building, could you say, no, 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 to keep with the character of these sort of single Victorian style homes, you can only have a single style Victorian home here. You can have as many lots as you want, but you can't make one ginormous building.
So
even if it has to make multiple buildings.
Yeah, but the way you would address that is then having a maximum facade facing the street, if you will. That no building in X district shall have a length longer than 90 feet.
Right, and there are those provisions in the code today that say your frontage length has to be within a certain distance. It has to be a certain distance. But I do want to point out that under the proposed code today, from on the side of King Street where the Horace Greeley house is, that is entirely the limit of 2 to 3 stories. Across the street, about I want to say it's where 149 King Street is. That also means 3 stories. So there is no 4-story proposal on the King Street Hill right now. I think it's important just to clarify that that's what it says. And I think to Lauren's point, it is in an F4 zone, which isn't a 4-story zone. It is the transect of F4, which is less urban, more residential, but it is not 4 stories.
I just want to get back before we go on. This concept of combining lots is something that was a bit tricky for me, and I had actually put this under the sort of King Street Hill bucket for discussion. But just as long as we're on that topic right now, and Jeremy just mentioned it. This idea of being able to combine lots on the King Street Hill, where you might have, sort of 2 of these, Victorian style homes that have now been converted into retail, mix of retail and residential today. The idea of combining those lots is really troubling for me, because then all of a sudden you have the potential for a larger, I know it wouldn't be monolithic, because I understand that under the code there's required variation in terms of the design of the building, but it would be a single large structure. And for me, that's troubling, because that starts to feel, beyond 149 King Street, really starts to feel like more of a residential corridor, even though I understand that there is retail there today. So I'm wondering, is there a way to disallow combining lots in certain areas, or to more tightly regulate? And that's new for me, Sabrina. I'm sorry.
Listen, I think there's a lot of value in that question. The first thing that jumps to my mind is really looking at the size of the lots in the different areas to really determine what combination means. Because right now, as I said before, we have very small lots. If you have a 1,500 square foot lot, you can't really do anything on that lot. I mean, it's going to be hard for parking, but if you purchase a lot next door that's 1,500 square feet, that's a 3,000 square foot lot. It's not that big, but we're not talking about 2 Rite Aids next to each other, 2 20,000 square foot parcels next to each other. So I think a little more consideration needs to be given, particularly in areas that are not within the designated retail area of King and Greeley. And we can definitely do that. And I can work a little bit closer with Nick, because I understand what your concern is. The question is, how far can we regulate that?
And I'm also hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it's necessarily the lots being combined. It's what can be constructed on those lots. So if someone were to combine 3 smaller lots to make a lot that can fit one building that meets in the character of a community, you're okay with that. It's what gets built on that lot and making sure that you don't have a solid wall going for 500 feet, 800 feet. And the code presents, that's right.
There's elements within the code that don't allow that to happen.
And you can have minimum distance between buildings, maximum building lengths. There are ways we can do that through the regulations to ensure that you don't get
the wall
that you're setting back. And you can also require, for example, staggered setback, that buildings within 50 feet of each other, one of them needs to be set back 6 feet, so you get this varied appearance.
And actually,
Sabrina,
I'm sorry, Jeremy, go ahead.
no, go ahead, Mark.
And I think it was the Ithaca form-based code. They've created this neighborhood compatibility clause where any protected district triggers the application of neighborhood compatibility, where they have a transitional buffer to ensure that, like, you know, if you have a one-story residential house, your next door neighbor is not going to be this, you know, immediately adjacent three-story wall building that's blocking your view, or et cetera, et cetera. So it certainly does put a point of, you know, making sure that when you're heading up to King Street, perhaps we put some sort of, you know, verbiage there that makes sure that we protect the residents who are in the vicinity. Sorry, I'm butchering that, but there's something that we can replicate that I've seen.
So Sabrina, maybe you and I should sit down and go over ways the current code addresses it, or how we could revise it to address these concerns.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is already in the code, Nick. It's really kind of putting some more personal characterization based on location within the code. Because right now it's just a blanket, and most of the focus was where we were talking about the required retail or required commercial. But now we're talking about specificity, particularly in relation to where we transition from our commercial area into our residential area. So I understand what's being asked, and we'll have to work on it a little bit, but it's a great comment.
It's sort of controlling the bulk.
Yeah.
And I think it's critical if we're grappling with this, and it's sort of stating the obvious here, but that even if it already exists, we need to make sure that the public understands that it exists, because otherwise it doesn't. Right? If you don't know about it, it might as well not be in existence. So we need to make sure that it's out front.
Well, and I mean, you know, I'll put this on the table. I have raised this with you, Sabrina, before, but you know, I would actually like to understand better the incremental value of continuing to extend up the King Street Hill. So, you know, given the nature of the properties and the size of those parcels beyond 149 King Street, I have questions about whether or not, you know, I don't know if others share this, but I have some questions about whether or not there is value in including those in the study area. So. And, you know, to that point, I'll just keep going. To that point, you know, on the other side of the street, well, actually on both sides of the street, you know, it's such steep slopes there that I'm not quite understanding how we account for those steep slopes. And are you really able to streamline the review process if you're developing on steep slopes? Or would the steepness of that slope mean that you would necessarily need to go before the planning board for permit review?
It depends how steep. It depends how steep.
Well, we should know that, right?
We didn't do a lot by lot examination when we created the code. Right now, there's provisions in the code that break down steep slopes with different types of review. The most extreme level, the code leaves with the planning board. And it really depends on the lot and the depth of the lot in relation to the slope.
Okay, could I just throw one more thing out at you? It's a New York State road.
Right.
So it means New York State DOT is going to have a say over what a sidewalk looks like, the depth of the sidewalk. Now, this is a new sidewalk. We're not doing a replacement sidewalk. So it means a 5-foot snow shelf, a 5-foot sidewalk, and you know that a retaining wall can't be on state property. So just think about the properties that are going up the hill. I'm not even going to attempt to tell you what direction that's in, but as you're going up the hill, it's on your right-hand side. And think about the retaining walls that are there.
Right.
And think
which are meant to continue to exist.
Well, they have to.
Yeah.
But they're going to have to all be shifted in 10 feet plus to allow for the 5-foot snow shelf. I mean, this is the problem that we've had with sidewalks all over,
Correct.
you
And
know,
so if we're
Newcastle.
requiring, how are we requiring property owners to install a sidewalk that they can't possibly install because the state isn't going to approve it?
But here's the thing. The code limits to 2 and 3 stories up the King Street Hill for a reason, due to the public roadway and the size of the lots. I think that there are great points regarding combination of lots and kind of how they lay out. But again, it's really, you know, trying to deal with the topography that we have, and try and you know, do a little bit more without doing too much, because we're restricted or constrained by the natural environment.
Right. I guess that's, you know, that just gets back to the point that I was raising earlier, which is what is the incremental value of continuing to extend up King Street Hill as far as we are? Because does that area help us to accomplish the goals that we set forth in the form-based code? Does that create the compact, walkable hamlet that, you know, will, you know, add density and put additional feet on? Like, what's the bang for the buck of continuing to include that when we know it's a challenging area? So, to be discussed further.
I don't have the answer for you tonight.
No kidding. Anyone else? I think we kind of jumped to King Street Hill, but the one other thing we had in this bucket that we were going to discuss, and then I think we'll call it a night for this first conversation, is we were going to discuss any considerations for 149 King Street.
I think it goes back to my comment about neighborhood compatibility and a protected district and like a transitional buffer, because I do think there's, like, right behind 149 King Street, there's the parking lot that helps people for, you know, Liz Jardin and Susan Lawrence.
Siegel's lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Jill. In any event, I don't think that it's certainly, I think that space, I mean, my preference personally, and just based on the public comments of the residents of 149 King Street, I would like to preserve it in some manner. Just figure something out there, because it is directly behind those homes, and I can see how that would certainly decrease the quality of life for those residents if something were built there.
My understanding of the key concerns for the residents of they have lots of concerns, but one of the concerns with regard to North Greeley for the residents of 149 King Street is that sort of row of homes that is along North Greeley that extends from sort of the Opportunity Shop to Donna's Hair Salon, and then further up to, I think there's a law office that it goes up to, but it's sort of a row of 4 or 5 little you know, houses, and there are residential units up above them. I believe today that is limited to 2 to 3 stories, and in our proposed version of the code that goes up to 4 stories. And you know, when I look at the cross section that depicts how those condos that are at the back of 149 King Street, that their view would now be into, you know, at a distance of, I think it's like 50 or 60 feet, be a view into a 4-story building. That to me is concerning. And so I'm interested to hear, I guess, from the consultants what mitigations they would propose, because I need to hear that. So I don't know if it's maintaining the 3-story limit that exists today, whether it's having some sort of buffer, if there's a buffer that can be created there, whether, you have a green roof on top of whatever needs to be built, that could be a potential. I don't know. I'm not the expert, but I would love to see the consultants come back with some mitigations for that, the loss of the view shed for those particular condos. And it's not, it's not just, people have said, well, their view today is to the top of a building and you see the HVAC units on top of the building. Sure, but you also see the rolling hills off in the distance, so I do think that there's some negative impacts to them that need to be considered, and I'd like to hear some mitigation strategies for that.
And the other thing, go ahead, Jeremy.
I just wanted to say as well, and I agree with what Lauren said, and I can appreciate the fact that this has a great impact on that specific, I'll call it a community, but that specific group of homes. And we have to figure out how to protect them, and whether that's keeping lower buildings right immediately adjacent to it, and that's certainly a possibility. I think, I'd love to give Tom Curley all the credit, but he had that sort of design, if you remember, it's about a year or 2 years ago, I don't remember now when he shared it, but somehow making that area a really sort of a town center where you had buildings and it was a usable park, if you will, instead of a parking lot. And that would make it a great location in terms of generating business, generating green space, or creating green space and protecting those buildings. I just don't know how you build that in, but it's something that I think would be great. I'd feel to work to.
And the other thing I know we got a lot of comments on was the concern of the residents of 149 King with traffic, and coming down the hill now, especially with the traffic light there now, a lot of cars block the ingress and egress to that whole development in there. And, how are we going to deal with that? And making sure that if any of this is built and there's increased traffic, that, they're able to get in and out of their homes. And how are we going to mitigate that? And it's a state road, so they're not always so easy to help us with markings or whatever else needs to be. But I know it was a big area of concern even now.
Anything else on this? Okay, I went to share my screen just one more time. So I think we got through the first two buckets, administration and process and regulating plan. I think based on the conversation tonight, we're all probably going to have some additional musings that may even fit into those two buckets. But I think the plan is to push pause on this conversation for now and come back to it at a future work session. Next week, December 1st, is our budget hearing, public hearing on our upcoming budget for 2021. Very exciting stuff. And we hope that everyone will join us, because we're actually tremendously proud of the budget that we've managed to put together for the community for next year. So please join us next week. So the budget hearing is Tuesday, December 1st. And then Tuesday, December 8th, we have the continuation of the public hearing on the form-based code, which is an opportunity for the public to come and comment on the comments that we've provided tonight, and to continue this conversation, because I hope that everybody takes away the fact that we are very much listening to all of the things that people are saying. We're adding to this list, we're adding to our list of topics and issues that we want to discuss, and so we very much want to continue to hear from you. So that's the 8th. So I think we're looking at December 15th as the next opportunity for the town board in a work session to be able to continue to kind of work our way through this list of issues and topics.
And just a reminder, just to say it again, there are a lot of things we didn't discuss that we still want to discuss, and we will be discussing. So just because we didn't discuss it tonight does not mean we are not concerned about an issue.
Very true.
I can't believe, though, you forgot to mention the joint waterworks meeting with the village of Pleasantville. 1st next week. That's from 6 to 7. And our community is welcome to join us.
Tickets
And
so
that-
fast for
It
that
is
one.
always a fascinating conversation every year.
Great stuff. We're very proud of our water. All good.
Rightfully so. Okay.
Right.
Thank you
All
very
right.
much for joining us, Sabrina.
Thanks,
Welcome.
Sabrina.
Happy Thanksgiving to everyone.
Happy
Yes, happy
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving.
Bye.
Bye.
Does anyone need a 2-minute bio break before we go into the town board meeting, or should we keep rolling? Jeremy's nodding yes. Okay, 2 minutes? Okay, we'll be back in 2 minutes. Hi.
All right, should we have a mutiny? Oh, she's back. She caught me. She caught me.
You were ready?
Not too late to revolt.
It's all still live, so you're good.
Okay. Jill,
So
do
my
we
mute-
have
my mute has
anything
been
else
cut
that
off.
we needed to cover in the work session before we move into the town board meeting?
The senior citizen exemption letter, perhaps?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes. So the couple of administrative items we can just go over very quickly. Are we ready to start now?
Yep. So we'll
Okay.
go over these administrative items in the work session, and then we'll go into the town board meeting after
That's
that.
perfect.
Okay.
So the first one very quickly is an IMA, an intermunicipal agreement for Stop DWI. We participate with the county and the state with these scheduled stops for DWI to make sure everyone's driving safely in town, and we receive a stipend for those additional stops. Authorization to use town property. Every year the Chabad asks us for permission to erect a menorah in front of the community center. It's side by side with our holiday tree, our Christmas tree that gets lit. And the last thing is a letter of support for the senior citizen exemption. So this addresses instances where, especially this year due to COVID, the senior citizen exemption has to be supported by tax returns, the most recent tax return every year. It has to be submitted to our assessor's office by a certain date. I think it's June 30th. Josh, forgive me if I got the date wrong. But in many instances, and unfortunately it's happening more and more often, something comes up and that it's very difficult for our seniors to be able to obtain the documentation in a timely manner, which puts our assessor in a very awkward position of having to take and pull someone's exemption because he just doesn't have the information timely when there's a good reason for it. This would allow him to extend that exemption and not have our seniors lose it due to no fault of their own, the tax returns just not being ready on time, or them having to get extensions because they couldn't get certain paperwork, or that they simply, can't get out and get get their paperwork in order. So we'd like to ask the board for authorization to be able to send a letter in support of that legislation. Everything else we've talked about. Lauren, I did note that there was one comment.
Jill, is the exemption that you were discussing only for the duration of the pandemic, or would this continue year over year? I thought it was COVID related.
I thought it was COVID related too. I did not print out the backup. Tiffany,
Sorry.
do you have the letter? Let's see if I can find it.
Yeah, okay, I've got it pulled up. Yeah, it's 1 year.
Yeah.
That you suspend the renewal requirement for
Can you hear
1
me?
year due to COVID-19. Okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yes, Jeremy, I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Because I can't see anybody.
You're kind of breaking up too.
You keep freezing.
Sorry.
Okay, I think that's great. I mean, I think if I recall correctly, we had some issues with some folks this
We
year.
certainly did this past year, right?
Trouble, they did not want to come into the office and so on, and with our limited hours, and at that time it was challenging. So I think it's great.
Is there a mechanism in place for a regular year to get an extension or to request an extension?
For the exemptions, no. They have to be filed by X date or you lose them. So our assessor's office scurries around. Our assessment clerk on a regular basis basis is in touch with they know exactly how many seniors the year before have applied for the exemption, and they literally take and pursue them to make sure that they get the paperwork. It gets sent to them over and over again. It's not unusual for us to go drive up to somebody's house, stick it in the mailbox, pick it up when they're done, or have them drop it off at town hall. But we're very vigilant with our seniors to make sure, and it's not just seniors, it's our firefighter exemption, first responder exemptions, things like that, where we follow up on them. The assessor's office does a fabulous job of making sure that people that have applied for them in the past get them in the future.
Are they asking for, I know that this one's about COVID, but are they asking for a vehicle to provide an exemption, or not an exemption, but an extension if someone was sick at a bad time? Or
no, if your tax returns are done, that's the documentation they need. They need the prior year's tax returns. So they're supposed to be filed in April. This is by June 30th. This is
got it.
Okay, that's all I have. If we want to move into our town board meeting.
Sounds good. Do we need a motion to come out of the work session and enter into the board meeting?
Nick's shaking his head yes. So can
Your practice, yes.
Nick likes that
Come out
documentation.
of
We
the
just-
work session and enter the town board meeting.
Thank
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I can rest at ease.
Oh, good.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the town board meeting for Tuesday, November 24th, 2020. We have a very short agenda for you this evening. The first thing is some announcements. The supervisor's report, I will actually hold my report as I have several times when our meetings have run long, and the substance will be, as it always is, in the e-newsletter that will come out tomorrow. I would just wish everyone in the community a very happy Thanksgiving and remind everyone of the governor's mandate that our celebrations must be 10 or fewer, and to stress that it's really important for everyone to follow these rules, that in order to contain the community spread, we have to act as a community. And so that means not flouting the state guidelines, wearing our masks, maintaining social distancing, and keeping our gatherings small this year. And we'll continue to give thanks for not contracting COVID. And the rest will be in my report tomorrow. Jill, did you have any items for the administrator's report?
I too will save mine. The only thing I want to just remind the community is that we are closed Thursday and Friday in celebration of Thanksgiving. And so I too wish everyone a very happy Thanksgiving, very safe one. And we'll be back in on Monday, 8:45. So that's it. Thanks.
Fantastic. Just before we move on to the public comment and new business, one of the items that's on the town board agenda for this evening is an authorization to appoint a new member of our planning board. And Lauren Levin was going to issue a statement about that.
Thank you, Supervisor Poole. I have read the recent criticism of the board's appointment tonight of Kanan Ajmera to the planning board, and a quote said to me brings this situation to light. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. There are many categorically false comments being circulated, especially on social media. One, Kanan is not a developer. She is a design professional and a vendor. Two, she does not have a business interest in the form-based code. Much has been made of a reference to Chappaqua on her website. It's fictitious, used for illustrative purposes. 125 Maple Street does not exist. The form-based code would not allow 7-story modern buildings. The illustration is merely used to support text about due diligence in project management and budgeting. She is not she is not advertising building in Chappaqua or proposing a particular project. It is disappointing that members of this community question our volunteers' integrity, as well as the integrity of the town board and planning chair on a public forum. Kanan is well qualified to serve on the planning board. She's an architect, and it should shock no one that architects represent developers. The existing members of the planning board are a civil engineer, a planner, an attorney, and an architect. We are honored to have her commitment to the town and I am super proud of the town's commitment to diversifying the planning board by appointing a female person of color. I welcome Kanan to the planning board and I'm pleased to support her. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Well said. Thank you. Very, very well said.
Thanks, Lauren. Okay, so we've reached the portion of the agenda that is for public comment and new business. If anyone in the audience would like to offer a public comment, please go ahead and raise your digital hand and we will ask Pam to bring folks into the meeting. Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move forward. The next item is our resolutions and proposed actions. Who's got them?
I have them. I move to approve the payment of claims in the amount of $1,791,447.56 listed on the summary pre-check writing report and detail voucher detail report, each prepared on November 23rd, 2020. Checks will be issued and mailed to each claimant listed on Wednesday, November 25th, 2020.
All in favor?
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye,
Try,
yeah.
Jeremy.
I was-
You're not ready for prime time yet, buddy.
I move to adopt the following minutes: November 4th, 2020 work session, November 10th, 2020 town board meeting, and November 17th, 2020 work session. Can I get a second?
You know, I did want to make
Sorry.
a note here. I'm sorry, I don't mean to throw in a pickle, but I think that there was a note from one of the residents that the minutes didn't.
Oh, yeah.
Accurately reflect an exchange. Yes, the minutes of the 10th. So could I just ask the board to approve the 4th and the 17th, and we're going to take and just go back to the tape and just modify the 10th.
Great.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay.
Thanks, Lauren.
No problem.
Okay, as
So I
amended.
second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move to authorize the appointment of Kanan Amjera to the position of planning board member to fill the unexpired term effective November 25th, 2020 to December 31st, 2022.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And we should thank her for her future service. And I move to accept the resignation of Lance Troiano from the position of laborer within the Department of Public Works Water Unit effective December 4th, 2020.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move to authorize the posting and hiring for the position of laborer within the Department of Public Works Water Unit.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move to authorize the town of Newcastle to enter into an agreement with the county of Westchester, acting by and through its Department of Public Safety Services in an amount not to exceed $8,400 per year to be paid in the manner and at the rate set forth in the agreement to operate the Westchester County Stop DWI Patrol Data Master Project.
Second.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Got it.
I move to authorize the Shabbat of Chappaqua to display a menorah in front of the Newcastle Community Center from December 8th through December 23rd, 2020.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Go ahead. Finish it.
Finish it? Okay. I move to authorize the town board to send a letter in support of Senator Helming's letter to Governor Cuomo requesting an executive order suspending the renewal requirement for seniors and people with disabilities for 1 year due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and that concludes our agenda for this evening.
I move to adjourn the meeting.